If human civilization gets enough time, given the speed at which climate change is accelerating, hydrogen is inevitable, and fossil fuel companies. What's different this time about hydrogen is its enemies are beginning to realize they're better off owning it than fighting it. The economics have always been profitable, and the numbers are there. I mean, there's nothing more powerful than a good idea whose time has come, and that's hydrogen.
Hi, folks. I'm Conor Gaughan, and welcome to Consensus in Conversation, a podcast where we're talking to the innovators, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who are committed to building successful businesses that also help us build a better world. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a happy and restful Thanksgiving. As a reminder, this episode is part 2 of a conversation I had with Rinaldo Brutoco, founding president of the World Business Academy and founder and CEO of H2 Clipper, a cutting-edge transportation solution for green hydrogen. If you haven't listened to part 1 with Rinaldo, I encourage you to do it. It's a great chat. Rinaldo has had an incredible career doing, well, just about everything you can imagine when it comes to having a positive impact. And he's got a ton of wisdom and insight to offer. Last time, we covered the early stages of Rinaldo's journey, discovering his skill and passion for entrepreneurship as a student leader in high school and college, his legal defense work defending Native American rights in Alaska and building California's first consumer law center, his decision to turn his skills to doing good for the world through entrepreneurship, his merchant banking approach, and how and why he decided to help build the first ever paid cable network, Channel 100. Today, we're going to dive in on the World Business Academy itself and Rinaldo's current work in the hydrogen space with H2 Clipper. But first, I thought I'd highlight a couple of big takeaways that struck me from the first part of our conversation. Rinaldo mentioned that his goal in coming on our show was to help current and aspiring entrepreneurs learn from his journey, both the triumphs and also the missteps. So here are some of the big learnings that resonated most with me. Something that really struck me was the mindset with which Rinaldo made his decision to switch from his law career into business. As a student and a lawyer, Rinaldo was passionate about fighting injustice, social, environmental, or political. And as he put it, he saw business as the source of much of the damage being done in the world. But instead of closing himself off to business as just the enemy, he decided to go learn business, to understand how and why the harm was happening, and to see if he could find a way to do it better. I think that's an incredibly powerful mentality, and one that in an increasingly polarized world, we could all gain a lot from trying to practice more often. For most of us, that's probably not going to mean dropping everything to pursue a 30-plus year career in a field where we see problems, but we can all try to approach our disagreements through the lens of curiosity and engagement, rather than just digging into our separate trenches and trying to win. It's a framework that's not about us versus them, it's about all of us versus the problem. On the more practical side, I love Rinaldo's line that the most essential skill for an entrepreneur is to be a survivor. It goes hand in hand with another important piece of his philosophy about merchant banking that I think is really important for both impact investors and entrepreneurs too. Never go in with an exit strategy. Now, to be clear, neither Rinaldo nor I are saying that it isn't important to have a backup plan in case something doesn't work out. Sometimes you get unlucky, even with the best efforts and intentions. So don't bet your entire life on any one investment or idea, no matter how much you believe in it. What I think Rinaldo meant was about not constraining impactful ideas with the need to be profitable within an arbitrary time frame. If you believe a thing is good for the world and ought to exist, then it's worth sticking with for the long haul. And that's why it's essential for entrepreneurs to be survivors. Even a little bit of growth, sustained and compounded over a very long time frame, can end up creating a huge success and equally massive impact. The key is to find the thing that you think is meaningful to do for its own sake, and then just keep going. If the idea is good, the money will come. Although I also love Rinaldo's bit of wisdom that not every idea needs to be a for-profit idea. Some ideas are great as nonprofit ideas. And it's worth developing your success as a for-profit entrepreneur so you have the money to fund the nonprofit ideas that matter to you. Or, as Rinaldo put it, I had to go make a bunch of money because I have expensive nonprofit tastes. What an awesome line. I'm definitely going to be borrowing that one going forward. So, with some of those ideas in mind, let's pick up where we left off and dive back into part 2 of my conversation with Rinaldo Brutoco. Enjoy! I think this is the perfect segue to jump into World Business Academy. And we've laid a lot of the groundwork for how you think about the world and your approach to entrepreneurship. How did all of that lead you to the creation of the World Business Academy? Give us the origin story.
Real quick, I mean, as I said, my first partners were the first guy that asked me about a speech I gave where I was talking about how if business doesn't change, we're doomed. We've got to get business to stop being unbelievably greedy for its own interests and let the devil take the hindmost in society. And my theory was no business operates separate from the society within which it operates. So, for example, if you thought you wanted to sell hot dogs in Iraq during the war, good luck. You're not going to make any money. You want to sell armament, you want to sell shells and bullets, yeah, but there's no domestic economy in the middle of a war zone, or very little. So my theory was business needed to see that the better shape society was in, the better business would do. And so I gave this talk, and Willis heard about it and came to see me, and he said, Rinaldo, so, what do you think needs to happen? And I mentioned the three things I did earlier about shifting the conscience of existing business leadership and the young people going to business and the public at large. And he looked at me and said, well, if that's what you think, why don't you do it? And I said, Willis, if somebody of your intelligence, your brilliance, your heartfulness, your commitment, if you joined me, I would. He said, okay. We shook hands. And he was at that time the head of long-term research. I believe he was the head of future studies at Stanford Research Institute, which is sort of like the Crown position at the Crown organization in those days. And he organized a meeting about a month later at the Stanford Research Institute, in the main big boardroom. And he invited 7 other guys who all done some very interesting things. And he said, here's an idea that Rinaldo and I talked about. Let's talk about it. And we met every one full day for 18 months until we incubated the World Business Academy. And we came out of there and I incorporated it and got its tax exemption. And I insisted that I not be a CEO without a governing body. Well, I didn't want that. It was too important. We needed more intelligence on the subject. So I said, the only way I'll do this is if at least 4 you other guys will join me and be responsible as trustees. They did. We launched, and the rest is history. We became probably famous early on for our publications because we are a think tank. And then over time, we had to get more proactive. So we became a think and do tank. So if somebody wasn't going to act on something we published, then we'd say, okay, let's put our entrepreneurial hat on. Let's get it done.
I love that description as a think and to do tank. I love it.
Yeah. And by the way, we've published a lot. I mean, we're talking dozens and dozens and dozens of books. I personally have written 4 books, 251,000 word essays, 45 major articles on a variety of subjects. And I publish at least one a month still. So it's a significant resource base with a specialization in economics. We used to have a special panel devoted to advanced monetary theory, itself an interesting story. We are really, really advanced in renewable energy, have been since 2007, and are very advanced, extremely advanced in climate change, meaning world-class materials coming out still. And I can honestly say, as I sit here 35 years later, roughly, we never have had a serious negative critique of our research. And some of our books are like 600 pages with 1,000 footnotes, and some of them are relatively short with a couple hundred footnotes. But everything that we publish has to be of a certain quality or it won't get through. And that's really what the passion of the Academy was, to form a network of business people surrounded by a network of thinkers who were not business people. So I remember when I put Deepak Chopra on the board 30 years ago, and my business associate said, Deepak Chopra, what does he know about business? I go, nothing. Nothing at all. That's part of the attraction. No, he's a brilliant thinker, and he's reflecting back to you what he sees as he looks at the popular culture and where he thinks the popular culture can go. And if you don't think that's good information, boy, you're not really looking at it straight. We've had one of the most brilliant female economists in the world, Hazel Henderson, just passed away, and she's been a member forever. And I could go on and on listing them, but at the end of the day, we wanted to tell them, and we did, that you, the business people, you're like the flour in this bread we're making, and the fellows are like the yeast. It's what makes the bread rise. So they're not the flour. We know that. They don't make stuff happen in the marketplace, but they are stimulating that marketplace activity. And I'll make one other comment. And one of the reasons I went to business, because it struck me that of all our institutions that were clearly under pressure and starting to collapse, and now most of them have, the one institution that seemed to be poised towards the future was business. Because if you looked at religion, it was about preserving the past into the future. If you look at universities or at higher education, their business was learning from the past so they could give you a trajectory to watch for as you go into the future. Only business takes nothing for granted. You're as good as your last sale. And the marketplace is a brutally effective mechanism if your idea isn't that good. And then in the marketplace, as I said earlier, you also run into entrenched forces that are so enormous. Getting around them is almost like a little mammal trying to get around the legs of a dinosaur, literally. And you hope not to get squashed in the process. And if you live long enough, the dinosaur dies and the mammal lives on. So that's really what inspired the Academy. Was a network first. And in fact, for the first couple of years, we had monthly meetings. We always brought a guest speaker in. And then we would challenge the executives in the meeting, usually never more than 24, because I wanted a complete square. And so we'd sit in a square and we would digest what we heard from that particular speaker. And then the second half of the meeting was always our coming back to it from a business perspective. So everything I do, even in the nonprofit world, is to look through a business lens. And I think that's what makes the stuff I do different and worthwhile. And nobody was doing it. And so here I am.
You gave it to us, when we first started talking in the biography, but knowing that folks are going to, might not have tuned into the first part quite yet, remind everybody what the mission statement is. Because I think having that kind of triplet mission statement helps us to kind of dig in a little more on your orientation towards the world.
Yeah. And so it's to shift the consciousness. And notice the word consciousness appears in all three parts of the mission statement. And it's never changed since we started. To shift the consciousness of existing business leadership to that of stewards, because you act differently if you think you're responsible. Number two, shift the consciousness of young people going into business, particularly our business schools. So they see themselves entering a temple, a noble profession, rather than a jungle. When I entered business, all the metaphors were jungle or war, kill or be killed, etc.
Right.
That's the wrong metaphor. If you see yourself entering a noble profession, you ask, how should I conduct myself if I'm going into a noble profession? And the third thing is for the public to get clear, what it chooses to buy has a tremendous impact on what will get made. So the public has chosen to buy electric cars. Now, the best salesman in the world since P.T. Barnum sold them on that, Elon Musk. But they did come to that conclusion. And as a result, all the automobile makers in the world who wouldn't make them an electric car, who killed them when they would. I mean, look at the GM mess, right? And now they're all playing catch up. And the largest car company in the world is Tesla. Now, I don't think that'll necessarily continue for a whole bunch of reasons. But that is how the industry was disrupted. And by the way, industries never disrupt from within. So if you think an industry is about to disrupt, good place for an entrepreneur. Yeah. Very good.
I'm curious, as you look back over the decades, what have been any of the either fundamental or massive changes to the way that you see business vis-a-vis the opportunity to change, to make the world a better place? Have there been major shifts in kind of the opportunities, the methodologies, the processes, anything fundamentally changed over the last 30, 40 years in businesses' ability to be a part of a better, sustainable, long-term society?
Well, when I started, there was no such thing as ESG. That was one of the things the Academy introduced. So environmental, social, and governance factors were not even considered. Yeah. It's like, how much money can you throw to the bottom line? Don't tell me if you had to steal to do it, because I don't want to know. Just give me my dividends, give me my stock buybacks, give me my whatever. So the biggest single thing is that ESG went from not being a concept except in the minds of very few of us, like in the Academy, because we were based on ESG, to where it's commonly expected. And even when someone like Florida's governor takes on the largest company in Florida, largest employer, Disney, and goes to war over their policy, basically says to Disney, I will destroy you in my state if you don't act as I want you to act politically. And to Disney's credit, they didn't cave.
Yeah.
And I think that was a hallmark of the feedback that the business community is now giving to the political sector. Now, we're going to see an interesting time post January 20th, because the pressure on business to give up ESG is going to be enormous. But when I started at this, you could have counted the number of people who believed in ESG on one hand in business. And today, I'd say it's probably at least 35 to 40%.
Yeah.
And that 35 to 40% is the most profitable 35 to 40%. They're the people making the most money. And the only difference is in industries where they have a lock politically. So that would be the fossil fuel industry. So the most profitable industry by far. I mean, egregiously profitable. Because remember, you only hear their profits after they've deducted a fleet of jets. I mean, the overhead structure is designed to create tax-free income to the executive and manager. Even then, they produce $15, $16 billion or more per quarter of profit. And why is that? Well, because they have tremendous political strength. They've been there so long, they own K Street. Now, that's going to change. And we can talk about why in a second, but there's a reason why a barrel of oil costs $70 today. And very recently, it was $120. And it's been coming down steadily. And that's even with the threat of war in the Middle East. So what happened? Well, the demand function's dropping. And from the supply side, the United States is now the number one exporter of oil over Saudi Arabia, and has been for more than 2 years. So the economics of the fossil fuel business is going to get turned upside down, whether they like it or not. And that will eventually create enough weakness for a new system of fuels to break through. In addition, you take a look at pharmaceuticals. I mean, as you sit at your TV and a normal night watching television advertised, you will see endless ads for drugs because they got all the money. They make outrageous profits. I mean, we're We pay more for drugs made in more, 40% more than they pay for the identical drug in Canada and Germany. Identical. And we make them. And they justify that, well, we need it for our research budget. I got to tell you, what they make in Germany is plenty good. What they make here is unconscionable. So to charge what they were charging, for example, for diabetes medication until the Biden administration stopped them, there's no excuse for that. People's lives are at stake. They can actually make it and sell it for $35 a month. Why are they charging the public $250? Well, politically, they got the government to agree that we could not group buy in this country for our healthcare system. That was a political law that was passed, which we finally overcame. And once we did, what happens? Well, that drug came down, plus 10 others now have come down from astronomical heights, which was clearly monopoly profits. So what will happen is Big Pharma will have increasingly smaller amounts to spend on K Street lobbyists. If they cut a deal with Trump, then that all bets are off. But that's where the pendulum was swinging, and it's still swinging in that direction. But of course, Trump might have the ability to end and put them back in charge.
Even thinking about like some of those examples, fossil fuel, for instance, I've read critiques even today, and for those folks listening, that we're recording this right after the presidential election was decided this week, with President-elect Trump winning. But even among the fossil fuel industry, you're hearing, and this may just be people are saying, first to admit that, but you're hearing certain fossil fuel executives say they don't want to roll back the IRA because they are adaptable creatures, like you said, and they saw the writing on the wall and they began investing in clean technology, some of them, and R&D, and now they've got profitability concerns. If you pull back all the positive green incentives, they're actually going to take a hit too. And so, the smart business, the smart investor, smart capital move towards that already. And so it'll be interesting to see how that affects the calculus.
Yeah, so that's very true. It's a very accurate observation. ExxonMobil is building a green hydrogen plant in Texas because they've known for 20 plus years that climate change is directly related to fossil fuels. They didn't tell anybody because they didn't want to hurt the profit margins, but they knew. And they thought, well, at some point, we're going to create a condition where our refineries are going to get swamped on the Gulf Coast by tsunamis, which is starting to happen, by the way. So they are building this green hydrogen plant with government money in Texas. Some of it's government money, some's not. And they've took on a 35% partner, the United Arab Emirates. Now, United Arab Emirates has all the money in the world and no technology. Exxon has tremendous technology because they've been stripping hydrogen molecules out of methane for 60, 70 years for their refineries, because you have to have hydrogen in a refinery to crack the oil. So they're putting this plan together to make green hydrogen. The Emiratis want to learn how to make green hydrogen and do with it to make it into what's called green methanol. And Exxon has a desire to turn this carbon dioxide they capture from their stripping barrels of oil down and breaking them. When they do that, they end up with a lot of extra CO2, which they were putting up in the air. Now they got to stop doing that. And it's much cheaper to blend it with hydrogen than try to dig a hole and put it in. So they will then make what's called green methanol, for which there's a very ready market, exists today in the ships at sea market, which will take a lot of the dirtiest polluting fuels off the ocean. So it's a win for everybody. And what I think is really going on, because the Emiratis published a book from their national oil company about, say, 81 rather, in which they said the future of our energy exports is green hydrogen. And they committed to 2 plants. Saudis came up with the same conclusion. They've announced 10 plants. And to give you how far along this, the Saudis' first plant is already opening. It's in Neom. And the second one's under construction. The other 8 locations are to be identified. So you're talking about the major players in oil, Saudi Arabia, Emiratis, ExxonMobil. They're getting ready to go do hydrogen as a transition where they can keep using fossil fuels, but demonstrate that those fossil fuels can be blended with green hydrogen. Why are they doing that? They have one enormous pressure that you cannot underestimate. Every oil company's balance sheet is based on its proven reserves. So proven reserves are reserves of oil and gas under the ground that you can prove exist, and you own them. So the balance sheet is the cumulative value of those proven reserves if you bring them to market. The oil companies all know that half or more of their proven reserves will never get burned. There won't be a planet here if they do. I mean, there'll be a planet, there won't be a biosphere. So they know they can't keep going. And someday people are going to figure out, wait a minute, their balance sheet's got 50% water and 50% oil. And that's going to be a heck of a thing. Well, if those proven reserves can be adapted to green hydrogen blending, all of a sudden that gives them another 5 or 10 years, but their proven assets will never be drilled and sold. And they know it. This is the step forward for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's turn our attention to the other big impact project you have going on right now, which is the H2 Clipper. So can you give us that origin story?
Yeah. So in my nonprofit, I was asked to be an expert for the state of Hawaii, and they were having a huge fight. Linda was the governor and was the first Republican governor ever elected in the state. It's very democratic. And so she decided to hit the heart of the Democratic fundraising mechanism, which was oil imports. So at the day I was asked to get in the middle of it, Hawaii was importing about 97% of all of its energy. Now, when you think of a place that has unlimited solar, unlimited wind, unlimited biomass, and unlimited geothermal, what were they doing importing oil at 97%? Well, they passed a legislative rule that said the energy company, Hawaiian Electric, gets to import oil and they get to mark up the price of every barrel by 10%. So it incentivized them to buy more oil and at the highest price they could find, which is why Hawaii ended up with the highest cost electricity in the US. So I was called in because the fight was between the governor, the business community called Enterprise Honolulu, and the legislature, which was at that time a very nice and honorable guy, Calvin Say, and they were on a collision course. They were going to blow up the pass through, it's called the 10%, which, if they had done that, would have blown up the local energy company and would have put the whole thing into a receivership. And so what they wanted was a referee. So I got involved and I helped them see how they could go from where they were, which is always my goal, show the existing business people how they can make more money doing the right thing, and then give them a path to get there. And so I did that for many, many months and ran over a couple of years. And I used to have a home for 39 years in Hawaii, which also was attractive to them because I knew the local scene. Anyway, at the end of the story, they loved what I did. They ended up giving me, we didn't get paid. The Academy, it's a nonprofit. I don't charge for that. But they adopted the plan, and the plan took them down right away. And today they're sitting at around 60% imported fuel and on their way to zero because they're now tapping their resources. At the very end of that project, the Speaker of the House, Calvin Say, which in Hawaii is interesting because he's been in the legislature his whole life and he's never gotten rich. Interesting politician. And he used to love it. Every time I go into his office, like once a week, he'd say, "What's the price of oil going to be tomorrow, Rinaldo?" He'd say, "Well, tomorrow, next week, here's what I'm looking at." And he said, "Would you go down and look at our geothermal plant, Puna? It's called Puna Geothermal." Because my people here around here, this building, they tell me there's enough energy coming up out of the ground. We could run the entire electrical system of Hawaii off of what that thing's capable of making. And I said, sure, happy to do it. So I went down, spent the day in the control room with the engineers, kicked a bunch of tires, did a bunch of study. And I came back a few days later and he said, "So what do you think?" I said, "Yes, it has more than enough energy to power the entire state of Hawaii." He said, "Well, then should we build an undersea cable to connect all the islands?" I said, "No, absolutely a terrible idea. You don't have enough money to do it. And if you knew what I know about your ocean currents, you wouldn't even try because you get some really tricky currents around here. You couldn't maintain it if you built it, so don't even try." But in terms of is there the energy's there because it's sitting on the edge of a rainforest and it's got geothermal, which is very close to the surface, volcano, right? They got a volcano. And so you can create an unlimited amount of energy, but it would be smarter to create and make hydrogen by electrolysis out of the water and put it in a dirigible and fly it to Honolulu. And he said, "Well, does such a dirigible exist?" I said, "Well, not currently, but there's no reason why it shouldn't." So I tell this story to a friend of mine who I should know better. And he says, "Well, show me what would it look like and how would it work?" And so I'm at lunch one day over a 2-hour thing. I drew out what became the H2 Clipper, which is the first airship in the modern era that is it's capable of carrying 400,000 pounds of liquid hydrogen. So no one but us has ever figured out how you put something that cold in the air. And we had to invent all our basic technology from scratch. And we designed a thing that looks like a rocket going sideways, which has virtually no wind resistance, no drag. And so we were able to get very high rates of speed. Its maximum speed is about 300 miles an hour. It cruises at 150 miles an hour, which nobody ever thought of for a dirigible. And we're building a thing that has a fixed structure, which is based on the work of Bucky Fuller. And it goes at these speeds, carries up to 400,000 pounds of liquid hydrogen. It operates 5 propellers that are driven by fuel cells that drive electric motors. So it's 100% green. And it's capable of flying any distance in the world. So when Morocco, which they've recently said wants to sell its hydrogen, green hydrogen, to Germany, Germany says, "Well, forget about it because you're too far away. We can't get it here." But as I just met with the man that runs the Chancellery, it's the chief operating officer of Germany, and his name's Wolfgang Schmidt. I met with him for about 90 minutes just last week, and we talked about that. I said, you don't get it. You can't even do it from Wick, which is Scotland, as a contract to sell hydrogen to Germany. You can't get it from Wick without a technology like the Clipper, and let alone Morocco. So the technology from Morocco is no different than the technology from Wick in northern Scotland. And it's in your interest to be pursuing that. He said, fine. As you know, we're interested in it, but we're really more interested in your type technology, how to safely move hydrogen once it's on the ground. So another one of our patented areas. So I have 14, 15, maybe even 16 patents right now that are basic. And one of them deals with moving hydrogen in gaseous form through pipes without leakage, because our standard is zero leakage, because we're environmentalists first. That's why I started the company. So the Clipper was started as a way for me to provide the mechanism to move green hydrogen from any place on Earth that could make it cheaply to any place on Earth that wanted it. Now, the key distinction is the cost of hydrogen. About 75% of the cost of hydrogen is the cost of the energy to make it. So literally, Morocco can make hydrogen cheaper than Saudi Arabia because Saudi is making it from sunlight. Morocco has sun and wind, and which most people don't know, Morocco, though a desert country for the most part, has the Atlas Mountains, lots of water. So Morocco is a perfect example of a developing country that could be selling massive amounts of green hydrogen to the industrial world if it had a way to get it to market. Our company, H2 Clipper, we decided doesn't want to be a large manufacturing company. We're a technology enabling company. So what we're trying to do, because we're environmentalists first, is license all kinds of people all over the world to use our technology so the hydrogen revolution can happen faster.
We've had a couple hydrogen conversations on the podcast over the last year, and it's funny. I think one of the CEOs, Zach Jones, had this phrase that stuck with me. He said, for him, this is hydrogen 3.0, and the tagline should be, "It's for real this time." And hydrogen is one of those energies that, maturation has been just around the corner for a long time now. And I'm curious, how you think about just the hydrogen industry right now, and what's convincing you that this time is the time it's going to take off.
Well, takeoff's a good, interesting word because right? No, if human civilization gets enough time, which is not entirely certain to me that it will, given the speed at which climate change is accelerating, which was what motivates me to stay at this. And if we have enough time, hydrogen is inevitable, and the fossil fuel companies know that, and the energy exporters of the Middle East know that. Everybody pretty much smart knows that, and we have to do it because it's the only way we can address the CO2 from climate change. What's different this time about hydrogen is its enemies are beginning to realize they're better off owning it than fighting it. So that's why Exxon and the Emiratis and the Saudis are all doing green hydrogen. What happens in most times with infant industries is they get strangled in the crib by the industry that's threatened. So pay TV was an idea that hadn't happened because the two times they tried it, once in Los Angeles and once in Etobicoke, Canada, they did it all wrong and it was a financial nightmare. And so the assumption was, well, nobody can make this work. Well, if you study what they did in Canada, you study what they did in Cheviot Hills in Los Angeles, you go, oh, I get what they did wrong here. They had to build the equivalent of a cable system and pay for it, but based on the sale of the films, which is then makes the film too expensive. What if we go to a cable system and we say, you got excess capacity, we'll rent a channel. It's a true story. I offered to rent a channel from Cox for $1,000 a month plus 5% of our company, or $1,500 a month. And they said, we'll take the $1,500 because this thing's never going to work. Now, pay TV obviously has become the biggest thing in television and then led to all these other things. So I think that the issue for most companies, and certainly for entrepreneurs, is finding that crack in the opening to the change that makes it possible for this time not to be strangled. Now, we can't say for sure we won't get strangled in the crib this time. The economics have always been tremendous. Let me give you an example. I said a minute ago that 75% of the cost of making hydrogen is the cost of electricity. Well, the cost of electricity has been coming down dramatically. You can make electricity in Saudi Arabia for $0.015 a kilowatt. You can make it in Morocco for probably maybe 2-3 cents per kilowatt, but you can go 24 hours a day instead of 12, instead of 10. So you're going to make way more and huge more profits because the same equipment is running all 24 hours, except you're tapping the wind and the sun. So you're getting huge efficiencies, which you don't get in Saudi, you don't get in the Emiratis. And that distinction means that the cost of the input down to, say, $0.015 in one case, 3-4 cents in the other case, is so much below the 39 cents per kilowatt that we pay for electricity in California that it's like it's mind-boggling. So I can tell you right now, exactly what they'll sell you a kilogram of hydrogen for in Wick, Scotland. I can tell you what they'll sell it to you for in Morocco. I can tell you what they'll sell it for you anywhere, Gujarat, in India. And we've actually put a chart together which shows the actual cost of production. And the only thing that's missing is how do you get it to market? And so we aimed all of our technological capability at what's called the midstream. So in the oil business, the upstream is drilling the oil and getting it out of the ground or the gas. Downstream is putting it in your tank. How you move it between the two is called midstream. We saw people, and particularly the oil companies, looking at upstream. They wanted to control generation. And we saw companies, including the oil companies, who wanted to distribute it. But what we didn't see was anybody who was going to move it in between. And that was an interesting challenge because it can come in two kinds. It can come in gaseous form, but at low pressure, which is uneconomic. So we had to invent a technology that would literally triple the capacity of existing space in what it carried, because the hydrogen molecule being so small, to make the same profit that you make on one methane molecule, you got to move two hydrogen molecules. So you got to double the capacity of the existing carrier system. And when we figured out how to do that without leakage, hallelujah, Holly, that means your profits just went up. And we did it, we are 3x, so it's even more profitable than methane. And the numbers are there. I mean, I was confronted recently in a hearing in Sacramento by a panel that was investigating what should the state do to help the hydrogen industry break through some of its regulatory burdens. I said, well, the first thing is you got to look at the fact that it's made for $1.50 a kilogram in California, and it's sold for $36 a kilogram at my station. Who's doing that? And by the way, when you go from $1.50 to 36, the burden shifts. You now got to prove me that you're not a monopoly or a shared monopoly or an oligopoly in this case. They were taken aback at the panel, the assemblyman. They said, what? And they asked the other 6 panel members who were from industry, SoCalGas, Air Products, et cetera, and from the public interest sector. And the woman from the panel, the assemblywoman, she said, is that true? I mean, do you all agree those numbers that he just said, $1.50 and 36? He goes, yeah, that's the actual number. Those are the real numbers. Now, that $1.50 is only possible because I can make it with very high efficiencies now.
Yeah.
So when you're making it that cheap and selling it for 36, you're strangling the industry. Why are they doing? Because they're trying to hold back the inevitable till they can get their plants up and running in control. And I think this time they'll let it happen. There's no such thing. There's nothing more powerful than a good idea whose time has come, and that's hydrogen.
Yeah. As you think about kind of what the impact looks like economically across the globe, environmentally for the globe, like when do you see this shift beginning to have material impact on how we, in positive ways? It seems like it's, as you said, the time has come. But what does that look like, and what kind of time does it take to get to market?
Yeah, I mean, so in Switzerland today, they're running hydrogen trucks up and down the Alps, and they're now going back. The Swiss are built a hydrogen locomotive. They can go over 1,000 miles on a single refueling. The French and the Germans make hydrogen locomotives. Why? The only way to get rid of diesel locomotives is hydrogen, because you can only afford to electrify rail lines if they're between 2 major population centers. So if you want to go from Paris to Lyon, no problem. High-speed rail, very efficient. But if you want to go from Lyon to Aix-de-Provence, that's a milk. That's a diesel. And in California, 100% of our train, all but one train, there's just one hydrogen locomotive now in California. Every other engine in California is a diesel. In the East Coast, the only train run that makes money is the Acela between Washington and Boston, right? Amtrak's Acela service, which I've been taking for 30 years. I stopped flying on airplanes because it's more convenient and cheaper to take the train. And I go from downtown Washington, D.C. to downtown Manhattan or vice versa. And it doesn't bother me if it's 6 o'clock and the traffic's stuck. Yeah. Because I'm not in the traffic. Well, that technology, which we've had to electrify a rail between DC and Boston, that can have a train in that case travel at 120 miles an hour, which is terribly slow. Trains in Europe run at 230 miles an hour. So the bullet trains are only possible if you're willing to invest in railroad track. And we have not been willing to. In fact, I would say that the airline industry and the trucking industry have conspired as 2 major, basically lobbying operations. They don't want rail to be efficient. They want it to take longer because that keeps them competitive with trucks. It keeps them competitive with others. So you're seeing hydrogen locomotives coming on the scene because it's the only way to solve a problem. And the nice thing about hydrogen locomotive, all you're changing is the propulsion system. The track's the same, the freight car's the same, the speed's the same, but now you're doing it without CO2 and carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide. So it's a clean solution. It's actually less expensive than diesel now, but it's really great for the guys who own railroads if they can get a secure source of hydrogen. So in Germany, which has a very aggressive hydrogen locomotive program. They recently stopped buying hydrogen locomotives, and the industry misinterpreted that because the technology wasn't working, and that's not the case. The reason they stopped is because they can't get enough hydrogen. Why can't they get enough hydrogen? Because it's too darned expensive. So when it's so expensive, the users are not going to switch off of fossil fuel. So by mandating that 18-wheelers have to get off of fossil fuel, they now have a choice, an electric 18-wheeler or a hydrogen one. Well, the electric ones don't go as far and don't carry as much weight because they have so much weight in batteries. So basically, you'll see eventually hydrogen locomotives, just because they're now. We've got one in California. You're going to see hydrogen 18-wheelers because the industry will want it. And the way it will break is when the hydrogen is widely available at fair prices. So when the shared oligopoly of Air Products and Air Liquide breaks, then you'll see hydrogen down at $7-8 a kilogram instead of 36. They'll still be profitable, and then it'll break out. And by the way, one of the other industries, two industries that are going to help hydrogen break load are cement and steel. These are called hard to abate sectors. It's hard to take crap out of the air when you do steel and cement. And both sectors acknowledge that the optimum way to make it now is to use hydrogen at high temperature as the way to make the steel rather than coke or coal or electric furnaces. So we've really made a breakthrough there because the technology is now quite clear. And they, like the Germans, are waiting until there's enough hydrogen on the market to be able to implement what we now know how to do.
It seems clear this is the future. I'm curious. I mean, you live, I think, at the tip of the spear in a lot of ways in the technology, and curious what the big innovations or fields of research you're looking at right now and excited about for folks that are, if there's a young entrepreneur who wants to get involved in spaces that have this positive impact. What are the exciting, innovative fields or areas in climate tech, or what do you have your eye on right now that folks should follow along and see what's happening?
Well, for sure, the most dramatically accelerating industry now and will be in the foreseeable future is alternative energy. Okay, there's nothing more complex, ubiquitous, or large than the planetary fossil fuel system. It is the planetary fuel system. And when you even tinker with that, you're talking about trillions, not just billions or hundreds of millions. So I would say young entrepreneurs particularly, there's going to be a huge number of openings in the renewable energy field. Watch for them and don't get ahead of your skis. A lot of people got ahead of their skis. I would say 75% of solar installers in California are now out of business because of a change in government regulation. That's tragic. And that was brought about, by the way, because the electric company decided that it was going too good. So they started pommeling it. The work on which the Academy has done on earth shades, which is controlling methane releases, which is by far more dangerous than CO2 and far more in depth. So we definitely think that earth shades, meaning a way to protect the earth from the amount of solar radiation hitting the ocean so that the oceans don't overheat and cause these massive storms and disturb the whole thing. CO2 capture from the air, so direct air capture it's called, absolutely going to be a growth industry. No question about it. Getting on any base there or anywhere you can. And geothermal is going to be huge because it turns out we can tap geothermal from almost anywhere. I once did a geothermal heat map of the United States. It's amazing. You could run the state of Maine off geothermal in Maine, interestingly enough. So, it's there. So all those, I think transportation system changes, hydrogen, transportation distribution. We don't have any hydrogen pipelines, we will, just like we have methane pipelines all over the place. And the hydrogen won't leak, the methanes leak like sieves. So that'll be a huge change. There's too many things I can't predict now because of the change in administration.
Sure.
So when we really know how much of Trump's rhetoric was rhetoric and how much of it was real, then we'll be in a better position to predict. But that's what I see.
Speaking of that,
and by the way, it's even under Trump, because remember, Elon Musk wants you to buy electric cars.
Yeah.
Musk doesn't like hydrogen, but he likes building rockets, and to build rockets, he has to have an efficient economy. An efficient economy requires hydrogen. So, and you can't tick off the Saudis and the Emiratis and everybody else. So there's I see that as something that will be over time. I think the other thing that you could get into today you couldn't have done 10 years ago is the chip industry. Clearly, we're going to be taking the best chip factories in Taiwan, rebuilding them here now because of the Chinese threat to Taiwan. And that means chip manufacturing for engineers particularly, but also for people who work with the white suits in the clean rooms, I think are going to be good opportunities in the future. Hydrogen currently runs 2 ships at sea, probably 30,000 vehicles around the world and growing everywhere but the U.S. Germany is, France is, et cetera. steel companies are now getting into green steel. First green steel plant is going online in, I think, about less than 2 years now in Sweden, and they've already sold out all their production for the first 5 years at a premium.
Yeah.
So, once the marketplace knows it can make money at something, and the regulatory pathway is open, then it goes through.
Yeah. As we start to wrap up, thinking back to the last couple of weeks, and actually it wasn't as negative as some of the past years, but just some of the headlines coming out of big climate events like COP seem to really focus on missing targets. And I caught note of a couple of times you mentioned, like, if we make it, these are big catalysts. These are big challenges that are with a expiration date. I'm curious how we can encourage folks to not succumb to the defeatism that sometimes I think is associated with all the negative headlines and all the tough challenges that we see ahead. How do we help folks, inspire folks, motivate folks to be part of building a better future and continue, that work despite sometimes the occasional negative or often the negative headlines? What's the path to defeating defeatism from your perspective?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for that transition, because the World Business Academy for more than a decade has been publishing a free newsletter. Hear me, folks. Costs nothing. It's called Optimist Daily, because it occurred to me about 10, 12 years ago that with what was starting to get to negative, and guys like me who are somewhat futurists, we tend to see these things coming a little ahead of time. And I'm going, oh my God, there's going to be so much negativity. What are we going to do to help people stay positive? And the antidote to cynicism and negativity is optimism, right? Be optimistic. So we have a division called the Optimist Daily. It publishes 5 days a week. It'll send a story to your inbox, a quote of the day, and it will send you at least one story and give you access to our archives under certain conditions. And we've got, 20-some thousand stories in the archives. And every single one of them is a story we thought you might not know about that was positive. So we try to find, and we do. We have great talent, and it's free. So we have a 60% open rate on that. And the reason is, even though it's free, you only go get it if you think you really want to be positive.
Yeah.
If you think you'd rather scowl at the mirror, you're not going to sign up. But if you're looking for a daily support, okay, all this crap is happening. What is the Optimist Daily going to tell me today to put a little sunshine in my life? And I think that's invaluable. So first of all, you can't get discouraged. Kamala Harris, when she conceded speech, basically said, don't let everybody tell you it can't be done just because it's never been done before. That's a hallmark of an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
The second thing she said in that speech that I think was good for entrepreneurs, that's particularly good about the way she looked at it from an entrepreneurial lens, was she said, when you are in your darkest moment, that's when you can most clearly see the stars. Mm-hmm. That's when things will pop through that you can, okay, there's an idea. And my experience with entrepreneurs over a very long period of time, more than 4 decades, being one and teaching them and that sort of thing, there is no question that the primary motive of an entrepreneur is not to get rich. The primary motive of an entrepreneur usually is they have an idea and they think it has merit. And, it could be something simple like, a new kind of toy. I'm not saying it's got to be like, the end of human suffering. Or it could, in my case, I screen for it. What's the biggest difference I can make? I've only got so many years. I want to make the biggest difference I can. So I screen for what I call high leverage opportunities. But you don't have to. If you're wild about a new kind of tinker toy, or the guy that invented the water gun that shoots like 30 yards, go for it. Because you got to follow your passion, or as I think it was Joseph Campbell said, follow your bliss. And I think that's an eminently wise way to look at it. You follow what you like to do, you will do it well, and it will work for you. And if you try to fit into somebody else's game, I don't think you're ever going to be happy, actually. Yeah. You're going to be perpetually like, oh, gee, I wish I could do something. I once read a statistic not long ago that more than half the people in the United States of America go to a job every day that they don't like. I find that just a stunning thing, don't you? Yeah.
I mean, it's how many hours a day, a week, a month? It's at minimum a quarter of your adult awake hours, probably more like a third of your adult awake hours. And you spend it in places that make you unhappy. It doesn't, it's sets the stage for collective depression and despondency. Yeah, it's shocking. Last question, we'll put the Optimist Daily link in the show notes, but how else can folks learn more about your work and the World Business Academy? Where can we send folks to learn more?
Well, yeah, I think, first of all, for sure, sign up for the Optimist Daily. And we have another free newsletter, comes out monthly, The World Business Academy publishes it free, and it tells you what we've been doing in various aspects, technology, et cetera. I am the entrepreneur behind it, so I'm always looking for ways to open entrepreneurial doors, and I will pick articles that I think, out of hundreds across my desk every week, I'll pick ones that I think either we did a good job writing up that opens your eyes to something, or will lead to something that could open your eyes and inspire you. So we never write just so people think we're nice. We write because we'd like to have an impact. And I get on and go to worldbusiness.org. So that's where you go to find us. Can you imagine how long we've been around if I've got that as a URL? Worldbusiness.org. And if you want to know more about me, you look under About and see that I'm the CEO founder, and you see, the books I published, the papers that are all available and stuff like that, and videos. In fact, there's a lot of videos we don't even know about because they show up on YouTube and we find out after the fact. How that happens, I don't know, but it does. I guess in addition to that, this is not a time to be an ostrich. So in addition to the World Business Academy, I read the New York Times Digest every day. I read the Financial Times of London US edition virtually every day. I read The Economist. In fact, there was a very lovely article that quoted my view of the lighter than air industry on the October 30th issue, and ends up quoting me at the end of the article. So I think that you got to keep getting more information in, and no entrepreneur ever knows enough, but you do get started, and then you keep learning, because learning is a lifelong process. So that's how I would stay up with these ideas, particularly the Academy mailing list, and particularly Optimist Daily.
Yeah, we will hyperlink all that in both episode show notes, but thank you so much for taking up a lot of time today. I think there's so many gems for anyone in business, but particularly for entrepreneurs and young folks looking to align their passions with their and callings with their work, and policymakers. I think will find this interesting. So thanks for sharing so much of your wisdom with us today. It's invaluable.
Well, I'll tell you one more thing.
Yes.
They asked me to answer this question as your last one if you ask it. If you didn't, I'm going to get it anyway.
Do it.
They asked me, what do I want my legacy to be? And my answer is, I want to borrow from a really brilliant entrepreneur, Mahatma Gandhi. He said, my message is my life. Create a life that is your message. You alone can do that. That's the brilliant strength and glory of being an entrepreneur. You get to create the life you want rather than the life that someone else thought would be good for you. Without attitude.
I love that.
Come from service.
That is the perfect way to end an episode. Once again, my deepest thanks to Rinaldo Brutoco for joining me on Consensus in Conversation and sharing so much of his wisdom and business experience. I highly encourage you all to go check out Rinaldo's work at the World Business Academy's website, worldbusiness.org, where you can find his columns, books, videos, and tons of other resources about impactful business. You can also sign up for their newsletter, The Optimist Daily, which is great. If you enjoy the work at Consensus, you'll love The Optimist Daily. As always, you can reach us by email at cic@consensus-digital.com. That's cic@consensus-digital.com. Or you can connect with me directly on LinkedIn and Threads at ckgaughan. That's at ckgaughan. Please reach out with any questions, comments, or ideas sparked by today's chat, or if you have a great suggestion for a future guest. And if you enjoyed the show, please consider taking a second to give us a follow, a like, or leave a review wherever you're listening. It really helps us to grow our reach and keep bringing you more conversations with the business and thought leaders that you want to hear from. Thanks, everyone. We'll be back next week with a brand new conversation. Consensus in Conversation is hosted by me, Conor Gaughan, and executive produced by me and Jeff Rock. Our producer is Will Gatchell, with editing by the team at Reasonable Volume. Special thanks to the Consensus team, including creative director Kate Tucker and Greg Harrigal on research. Consensus in Conversation is a podcast by Consensus Digital Media, produced in association with Reasonable Volume.